All right, we are live with Videogame Sommelier. I am your host, Ryan Swindoll, and tonight I am solo casting our playthrough of Dear Esther, and I'm excited to be here. Unfortunately, Justin and Jimmy have other obligations, and we decided we would just try something totally new. We are going to actually play a game on the stream. And this is one of my favorites, Dear Esther, a game by developer Chinese Room. And they are a brilliant team of UK developers. Dan Pinchbeck's the writer and kind of mastermind behind a lot of the kind of interactive scenarios that are in their games. Jessica Curry is the composer. She is a brilliant kind of contemporary classical composer, and her work is kind of front and center in this experience this evening. I'm excited to walk you through it. I think games like this are best experienced yourself. You know, at your own pace. You can kind of walk through, think, and kind of allow the silence to guide your heart and your thoughts as you're exploring this island. But tonight I'm going to be acting like your tour guide, and because of that, it will be it will fill up, I think, some of that contemplative space that this game is supposed to kind of inspire in you. Hopefully, we'll have the best of both worlds this evening. And so let me go ahead and just open that right up. Should be pretty loud, and hopefully the volume levels are coming through all right. If anyone happens to jump on the stream this evening, let me know if the volume is not working properly. And without further ado, let us pick up at the start of this game with the lighthouse. I'll just say a couple words before we begin. Dear Esther is a game that pejoratively might be called a walking simulator, but in actuality, it was a groundbreaking game that created this genre of adventure that involved very little interactivity except for the kind of spatial kind of wandering of the player. And as you observed things and heard things, you made observations about the story. And so a lot of the interactivity of the game, the puzzle of the game, if you will, is happening in your head as you play. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started here, and it's going to drop us right on the island. So here we are. We'll kind of wander around here. That's really all this game is about, making observations of this strange, haunted time and place you find yourself. So there's just so much to take in at the beginning here, but some setting. Obviously, we have been shipwrecked on this Hebridean island. The Hebrides are off the coast of Scotland, so I'm guessing it's fairly cold, and the howling wind makes me glad I'm wearing a sweater right now. This lighthouse seems to have been in disrepair for a long time. And as the narration suggested, perhaps abandoned for reasons unknown. As we walk in here, you'll notice a couple things. The themes of paint cans, of scrawled messages in the paint, of course, disrepair, loneliness, no one's around. And if you can catch it, we're going to see if we can spot a ghost. Oh, probably already left. There are, in fact, ghosts dwelling in the corners of this island. And I'll point out the ones as we can see them. They're incredibly difficult, but we also have these strange chemistry markings here. And whoever this narrator is, he's narrating to Esther, who is some kind of beloved. And his thoughts are very intellectual. They're a little hard to parse. So we'll take them one at a time. There should be another one coming up in just a few moments. A signal. So here, I believe, is the cave that the narration spoke of. And it's interesting that this thing begins with a myth, the myth of this hermit who came in a boat without a bottom. They're very evocative images and ones that make no sense at all, right? And that's, I think, partly the point. The idea of traveling to this island in a boat without a bottom and conversing with the creatures of the sea is perhaps some of the strangeness of what this game represents. We are here walking the island and conversing with images, memories, things that we don't have any context for. And we too are like a hermit without anyone to interact with. So as we walk the cliffs here, the kind of austere vertical nature of this place really is captured by that soundtrack. Then indulge in contradictions. And here we're listening to a fugue, right? Strangely scrawled here is the golden ratio, a kind of mathematical symbol of beauty. Again, to what purpose? It's unclear. So this road looks like it would take us somewhere. And we see car parts, an axle, wheels, kind of littered at the base of this ravine, which is a dead end. And so we find ourselves having to double back. Part of what makes this game really interesting, it feels open world. It feels like we can travel anywhere. The paths, however, are quite linear and are actually meant, if you might think of a museum, to guide someone through an experience. So the fact that we wandered here to a dead end is very much a part of the point of this level design. It might seem pointless, but the notion is we are kind of living this intangible experience of the character coming to a dead end and then having to turn around, double back, being lost and confused, wandering in the silence. And here we finally find some steps that should be taking us somewhere new. The narration that we just heard seems to lay bare some of the metaphor of this game. Is this a real island, or is this some kind of manifestation of an experience that this narrator has had in his life? As he says, the rocks are my bones. The caves tunnel within him. Again, very unclear, but the aerial he mentions will transmit into him, and that is that red light we see in the distance there. The game is very much heading there. Mm. And so here we have seen car parts down there. Now we're being treated to some narration about a car accident. And it's clear that whatever this narrator and Esther went through related to some kind of car crash. And even those lines cut into the cliff there are reminiscent of roads. The haunted nature of a lot of the narration kind of shows that this being shipwrecked on this island is not merely a fact of this narrator's existence here, but perhaps something that he's done to himself, or something he feels cut off from people and civilization. So here we wander these strange rocks kind of sitting in the middle of this path, and we observe some more down here. Let's see where this takes us. Again, more kind of metaphors of place and the mention of contradictions. We haven't seen very many contradictions except in what the the narrator has mentioned. So let's see if we can spot some. Clearly, the paint cans and the chemistry markings may seem contradictory as objects on this island. There's some kind of litter on the ground here. Hearing some radio static, like the aerial is transmitting through this narrow gorge. So Paul is another of the characters here, and he is kind of the antagonist. More paint cans, cellular symbols, chemistry, deep sea creatures. I love it. Let's see. You catching everything here? Oh, look, here's the hermit. Bedroll. Is that a newspaper? Various things kind of strewn about. Here, some clothes. A suit, interestingly, and tie. Hence the contradictions, right? How did these things get here? Are these really the artifacts left by a hermit? And there's a gull. Who at the beginning were said to have abandoned the island as well. And yet one seems to be leading us on now up this river path. And always toward the red aerial. Obviously, a radio tower is meant to communicate. And so with these letters, he seems to be searching for the words to communicate to Esther and trying to gather himself through his wanderings on the island. What is he trying to say is perhaps one of the most important questions. Oh, gosh. Oh, wow. A heart without a bottom. Really pretty. Stones. That he said were reminiscent of the scriptures that the the indigenous shepherds of the island had erected. So this is the end of chapter 1. There's 4 chapters, and this chapter is called The Lighthouse. And the main subject matter seems to be understanding the hermit and the shepherds and kind of getting a sense for the various characters of the story. We also, I think, heard 3 narrations that began with Dear Esther, which are, you might think, the letters of the game, the actual pieces of communication intended for this beloved figure. But we don't yet know anything about what is motivating or driving this character. And so let's see if we can pick that up in this next scene. The site of an accident. He seems to want to go back and find it. But as the last word of that narration indicated, unable to pull ashore, his being unable to find it seems to have more to do with some kind of mental state he's in, as opposed to actually not being able to locate the location on the road. Here we see a ghost. It's a little bit difficult to describe, but if you look in the exact center of the screen, it's not there, but keep your eyes on that position as I rotate the camera. The ghost suddenly appears in black. And there it kind of stalks the edge of the path, and we should be able, I think, to follow it if we keep our screen in the right place. There it goes. Yeah, it kind of animates away, and there it is. It's kind of hanging out there on the edge of the path, wandering. You can see it moving behind the grasses. I believe it takes up position at the end of this trail, where then yeah, there it is, looking out over the sea. Now, what do we have here? We have this maze, a giant tanker accident, right? Shipping containers decaying on the beach. We'll go down there and explore that in a minute. I want to head to the end where the ghost is. We're going to round the bend here, and the ghost will, of course, have disappeared. But this vista, a lot of the positions in this game you might think of as secrets. So Donnelly is the character who has more or less written the history of this island. And you might think of Donnelly as a unreliable narrator, someone who's written a history, but of course, it's a history of legends that are incredible and miraculous. And what can we really know? There's that Ariel again, kind of sitting on top of cloud. And that too seems to represent the narrator's experience here, unable to get any hard facts about the island, about its history, about his own history, about his own tragedy. It has the feeling of being almost like an experience of dementia, trying to make sense of these facts of life, but missing kind of the key, the answer key, if you will. So now we're about to walk into these crisscrossing paths, and let's see what we can find washed up on the beach here in this massive shipwreck. Litter. All right, here's a few things. We've got a barrel, another newspaper. What's down here? A shipping box. Oh, yeah. It's a mess. Nothing, however, very significant just yet. Let's see if we can trigger any lines of narration. Another beacon, that buoy. Oh, here's something. What? What is that supposed to mean? Okay, here we go. Neither did he eat nor drink, and neither did he eat nor drink. So the reference of that is not obvious to us yet, but it is a line from Acts. And we'll be getting more of that quote later, but it's in reference to Saul, the conversion of Saul, the traumatic experience of being thrown off the horse and going blind. So let's wander now from this shipwreck into the heart of the island. Wow. So that was super telling. It's very possible that this is some kind of final experience of this man, this narrator. A giant hole here. Very creepy. All right. So, based on what we've heard, it seems that this narrator and Esther were in a car crash and she was killed. And he is now later in life trying to communicate with her. That is the Bothy, the home of, I believe, some of the shepherds or Donnelly. We'll travel there next. It's kind of a winding path. And I'll try to point this out, but there is a ghost standing up there that will disappear as we draw closer to it. These very tiny black specks, these ghosts kind of observe your journey through the island. Here we go. Okay. Whew. Kidney stones, perhaps. Been a thing he's mentioned once or twice. There is not a run button in this game, which was to the chagrin of many players. But what's the point of running through this game? It's like running through a museum. Let's see if we can spot that ghost. Yeah, he's there. It's between the second and third window. There's a black figure standing. Just went into the house. Oh, bummer. Mm. Gorgeous string section. Mm. Let's take a look inside. So this was Jakobsen's house, and Jakobsen, another character who, yeah. Mm. Mm. The insinuation that he's lived this several times. More chemistry here on the mug. And yeah, why is it that all the characters so far? Oh, yeah, there's another ghost with a lamp and the gull kind of hiding there in the cave mouth across the way. It's hard to tell, it's very small. But there's this insinuation that all of the characters who have visited this island have undergone some tragedy. Yeah, another rocky bay and that buoy out there. There are a few secrets to explore down there. I'm not going to spend our time. I'd like to just continue moving forward. um, I feel like the game kind of allows us to wander a lot and wonder a lot through the beginning here. And it really comes into sharp focus in the next chapter. So let's go ahead and move our way down here. So, as he said, we had to climb up before we could go down and under and through. And I wonder too if that's kind of a metaphor for grief or how one processes it. If the game is instructing us in this way, it's like we have to rise up and gain some perspective on the events. Yeah. Okay. So those chemistry diagrams may be a formulation of the chemical compound of alcohol, possibly a sign that he was drunk behind the wheel of the car. Whew. Mm. My bones are the stones. He seems to share in the diseases of all the characters he's talking about. And yeah, Dave, you're exactly right. This is spooky. The mist coming off of the water. Whew. All right. So again, our path led kind of this curving path around the island, and now we're heading toward the entrance to the caves and perhaps to the heart of the revelations that this narrator is working through, this man is working through. So we are also going to pass this wreck of a boat. It looks like a skeleton of a whale or something beached. It's all of the ribs of the boat sticking out of the ground. And also, curiously, the mast in a shape of a cross, kind of marking the passage between where we've come and where we're about to go. You have to cross at the foot of it. And I just love metaphors like that. I'm like, all right, this game's speaking my language. Here we go. First, let's just look over here. Ah. Mm. And another dead end. And curiously, there's the book that he threw over, right? By Donnelly. But here's more of it. And letters he's written. He seemed to have thrown an entire chunk's worth of books and letters down into this gorge, like one of the narrations said he might do. but they've all washed back. Perhaps the tide has brought them all back to the island. All of his attempts to kind of send communication away have come back to him. Whew. It's like a really awful plight. The idea of not only being shipwrecked on the island, stuck on it, but also unable to get any message away from it. So here we enter the caves. And already we're seeing a color palette switch. All of those stark natural tones now have almost got like an eerie, ghostly glow, a bioluminescent kind of thing. And this unfortunate hole is where we're headed. It looks like we're heading down the throat. Oh, yes. So he was relying on Donnelly's recorded history to kind of help him make sense of his experience of the mainland. But here in the caves, he's on his own, and his flashlight is broken, sitting there on the ground. And all at once, I'm just struck by how gorgeous it is down here. All of the natural cave formations, the crystals on the walls, and then strangely, lit candles. We've in some ways entered a memoriam. The water reflecting off the wall. Always dreaming. The vocalist is singing. All right. Green. Yeah. Mushrooms growing here. It's just arresting. And look at this. Perhaps in the shape of a heart. It's oh, gracious. Whew. Circuit diagrams of internal combustion engines. Yeah. And who's the one leaving all these messages? It almost seems neurotic, right? To take this bioluminescent algae and be spreading it in these patterns on the walls. Is this a story about being willing to let go? Oh, yeah. Look at this. Wow. All right, we're going down. Hmm. The eroded rock is such a nice touch. The water has smoothed it out. Yeah. It feels very perilous, and it is possible to slip back down. But here we find another candle, and the journey continues deeper through these caves. Long and narrow, like a dream. We crouch and we crawl down. It's almost spiraling. Oh, wow. Here we are. There's a paper boat drifting down stream. No explanation for that. But like the boat without a bottom, it doesn't seem perhaps very seaworthy. All right, let's see if we can get back up here, if we can wander around. The rows of stalactites are amazing. Yeah, look at that. Wow. Crystals all over. And I think we're getting a strong impression that this island is actually a metaphor for his body, and that by going into the caves, we're traveling into the darker, the intestines, frankly, and perhaps even the more primitive, um, biological parts of him. The understanding began very much in the mind and now has traveled all the way down into the gut. Strange diagram there. This natural land bridge. Yeah, this room is just so large. So let's cross and start making our way back up. Mm. More paint cans. It's like the strings are always looking for a note of resolution that it can't find. All right. And here the cave walls almost look like stars. And now, curiously, oh my gosh. Whew. That was tough. This is that shaft we saw from above, now seen from below. And in some ways, this shaft marks kind of the passage of life and death we're hearing, even in the water here. A kind of repository for the things that fall from above and then are buried underwater, dissolved into nothing. Yeah. Okay. So this is where his mind, which is already not great, is beginning to lose it. Behold, Damascus is taken. The scrawlings of someone who cannot let go and continually is attempting to work it out. Deep sea creatures on one side, chemistry on another. Oof. Taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. I believe a reference to Genesis. And most definitely a metaphor of this guy's experience. And now we have to go underwater here. We have to swim under to make it through. I always wonder if there's a ghost on the other side of this. Up the tunnel. It's hard to say. So naturally, we try to make our way around and we fall in. And then this happens. We're on the motorway. And there is a hospital bed with coins thrown in from the well. We're hearing a ticking sound, a blinker perhaps, of a car. Is there any car around here? So this is a good time to mention, perhaps I'm guessing a third of the narrations, objects in the game are actually hard-coded in. The vast majority are randomized. And so in this scene, for example, you might see a hospital bed as we do, or you might see a car. Or you might see two cars. And so the effects are are changed, and that kind of changes the metaphorical space in which you're interacting with this as a player. And as well, a lot of the narration is randomized. So the little quips he gives about this and that might be an entirely different clip in another playthrough. And so the only way to kind of fully parse the story and a lot of its mysteries and puzzles is to play it multiple times. So here now it's taking us out of the scene, as now we're coming to submerge. And in some ways, that was our reliving of the tragic moment. In this case, it happened in a hospital, around a hospital bed or a gurney. And now we travel the path up and away from the moment of grief, having taken the lessons we've learned from the caves. All right, the fourth and final chapter of this. A lot to see here. But we return to the mainland, and now we are going to ascend the aerial. And here you'll notice candles are back and are perhaps serving as memorials to various important aspects of this grief. And here we see an eye looking at us through the mouth of the cave. So the ghosts continue to watch us. So let's go left, if I can get up there. Let's double back and take the other path up so that we can see whatever those candles are illuminating. I did like seeing that giant diagram on the side. Parallel lines is another theme we're seeing. All right. Here are the candles. Let's see. A memorial to all the paint that was spilled to make this game possible. All right. Lots of ghosts around here. There's another one. Another memorial over there. They look like the memorials you would see on the side of a road when someone gets hit. And of course, there's a funeral idea here, photographs of a car wreck. Hmm. So we're looking at a figure, um, looking out over this wreckage, and is backlit. So this is really the only ghost that presents itself very obviously in the game, and very likely is the figure of Esther. And we kind of hear what I'm hearing here in the narration is that this knowledge that we are all in our death going to become dust again, worn into granules, that he just said. And the whole idea of a resurrection or a heaven or an afterlife is just as fantastical as thinking that a hermit came to this island in a boat without a bottom. And so you really get the writers wrestling with this desire for a miracle, this desire to work one out on the walls of the cave and understand that there can be more to this life than simply what is presented to us in the rocks. But the fear and perhaps the need to recognize that is unlikely and may never happen. The miracle may not come to pass. Well, let's see where this story takes us, because even the ending's narration is randomized. It gives us different things to think about every time. And here we have a photograph of someone. Looks like someone walking with a cane. And another diagram here. And there's the aerial. We're really close. Let's make our way around. Mm. Memorial to the car wreck here. Now these candles form a point. I'm going to follow the point, and I think there's a reflection to be seen in the water up ahead. Let's see. Yes, no? Perhaps not. Hmm. Well, and I could just not be approaching it from the right angle, but there is a ghost reflection that can be seen in the candlelight in the water. I'm just unsure of the angle we'd need to see it and exactly where it is. And it may be also randomized. There you go. Hmm. A garbled refrain, remember me. Oh, gracious. Yeah, this game has made me cry a couple times. It's just so heartbreakingly tragic. There are 21 boats here, including the one that we saw um, in the caves. And like we said before, the communications seem to be being cast out and coming back to him and finding no one to read it. And that too is like a metaphor for death. It's um it's the ultimate separation from our ability to communicate. Uh, what does that say? On a sudden, a light from heaven shone around him, and he fell to the ground. And we get these eggs, these birds' eggs. So that is a reference to Acts. That's a reference to uh, Saul's conversion, and this whole idea of can we really be born again? And it's represented here in the eggs as well. The gulls who had left the island, nevertheless, seem to be around. We've seen one leading us. How do we make sense of that? Isn't this island supposed to be abandoned? Why are the, why are we even haunted? Is this all in our heads, or perhaps is something trying to reach out to us in these ghosts and metaphors that we encounter along the way that are randomized? So let's now make the final ascent and see what final things we learn. If you recall, the body of Esther was backlit up here on the ridge. So we'll see if we can see that again. So there's the figure. From candle to candle, perhaps we are like a ghost unto that figure. But any attempt to cross the chasm between us uh, ends in that vision being lost. There's no way to get up there without the ghost disappearing. And here's a weird effect. The scene becomes oversaturated strangely. The oranges become red. Here in the gulls again. Mm. Yeah. And now we stand as the ghost haunting this cliff. And all of those lights below are almost like a constellation. And here we get the scrawlings have changed now to scripture. And as he was proceeding on his journey, it says, no longer are we attempting to parse the mysteries of chemical life, but now we're clinging to myth and and legend, right? In the ideas of this game, we're clinging to almost a blind hope. And was come near to Damascus. So Damascus was a ruined heap, but now it's the site of a great conversion. Nor did he eat or drink, and he was 3 days without sight. 3 days without sight. It's a kind of idea of the burial of Christ. And in the same way, here we have traveled this island perhaps for 3 days. Here is the last location before arriving at the aerial. It's a strange kind of compound that looks over the bay. Mm, that is an engagement ring just sitting there. His his hysteria is perhaps seeing connections where none are, or maybe he's seeing the connectedness of all things. Um, that's perhaps the kind of great ambiguity of the ending here. And he and it came to pass that as he made the journey, I think it's repeating the lines we've read before, now in succession as we rise above the final ascent. We begin to see the stars next to the aerial. That's no coincidence. This game is like a car crash of metaphors. Mm. Wow. The wind is going. Almost there. This is where we need that run toggle, right? All right, here we are. Now, if we're lucky, we see one more ghost standing up there watching our final ascent. So why else would he want to why else would he want to climb this aerial except to jump off of it, right? But what does the jumping off of it really mean? So it takes away control for this end. Mm. So Donnelly and Jakobsen were in some ways metaphors of the other participants in this car crash. And so here we go. The plummet. Mm. So it seems so hopeless, right? There's only one way for this to end. And we see the shadow of the gull that we have turned into. Our own conversion, if you will. And then the flatlining heart monitor. And that is Dear Esther. So this game is ridiculous. It's just so um, idiosyncratic in some ways. Like it is very much a love child of Dan Pinchbeck's writing and Jessica Curry's music. And It first came out in 2008 as a mod for Half-Life, interestingly, just a kind of experimental story. And then they actually they took it, they expanded it, and they released it as a standalone game. And that was in 2012. And that launched the whole genre of walking simulators. But the game itself is just it's just so specific. And the themes it explores, with death and bereavement, the death of a loved one and your own death, the desire to communicate to the people you love, and then the frustration of being unable to, and even the frustration of being unable to compose two thoughts together, um, just really haunts this whole piece. It's a very um, it's a very bleak and melancholic experience. But I think of games as largely most games are largely escapes, right? They they don't tend to delve into these more, terminal end of life kinds of questions. Certainly, not at the level of this affecting, artistic embodiment of it. So, uh, yeah, then the game was remastered in 2017 in the Landmark edition, which we just played. So, yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious, kind of what what might be left to talk about. I'll say is I'll just kind of dim the volume here if I can figure out where my mouse is. There we go. Um, the So the ideas of this game really prompted a more serious exploration, or I might say not more serious, but more complete, more comprehensive exploration in Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which many look at as like this spiritual successor to Dear Esther. And Rapture has moments of that same kind of melancholic, bleak feel, but it's not as thoroughgoing as it is in this game. This game is in some ways very dark, and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture plays a lot more evenly. Switching from various tones and kind of exploring more of the breadth that would come out in the midst of bereavement and of catastrophe. But some people have struggled with this game because it refuses to peg down the answers to the story. It's like, well, was Esther real? Was Donnelly real? Were they all figments of his imagination? Who was drunk in the car crash? What was he and Esther married, or were they engaged? And really, the story is told multiple ways through the various randomized narrations and through the randomized objects that you would find. So, in the game, kind of suggests that many of these interpretations can be valid. So it leaves you wondering, well, if I can't know exactly what happens, how can I parse the truth of this game? Or, does that like cheapen the emotional feeling of it? I don't know. I don't know if it did for me. I guess that's all I could say. I played this game probably 12 times all the way through, maybe more, and experienced, I think, every line of dialogue through those playthroughs. And the kind of broad strokes of the narrative are very intact, and so it is possible to kind of critically understand and explore it. There was a car crash, and there was a bereavement, there was a separation. The the narrator is attempting to communicate to Esther. These broad strokes being in place give us enough, I think, to work with emotionally, that then we can use some of the kind of wandering pieces, the constellation of related events or ideas, and form our own conclusions, or simply allow the confusedness of it to kind of immerse us in that um, that kind of like awful brain fog that would come with grief. Being myself um, a religious man, and someone who does believe that our lives bear more significance than our material bodies, I'm very compelled by stories like this that really want to believe, but also take very seriously the kind of limits that science would suggest we can know about about us. And so when I see, especially Dan Pinchbeck's writing in the Chinese Room, I see him wrestling with this a lot. And they're a UK production house, and so Christianity and the scriptures are a huge part of what it means to be British at one level. And so they definitely explore that in the writing here with a lot of biblical allusion. We passed underneath the cross at one point. We heard about shepherds following the scriptures and finding ways to express it in their own language or way. And we saw, of course, the story of Saul and the metaphor of his conversion as being a huge part of the end of this game, and the conversion that happens as you plunge from the aerial and turn into a gull. I suppose that, if anything, I'm left with asking this question: well, if this is just wishful thinking on the part of the writer, or is it a kind of like thinking by way of necessity? Like, at the end of the day, it's just so bleak to think of the alternative. We have to allow some hope to come in. Or does he put some credit in those scriptural stories, right? Does he really believe in the hopeful connections that his written character here, the narrator, is kind of like, it is making these connections in the middle of a kind of wild, fever dream of kind of reflection on life. So yeah, I'm grateful for this game because it's so ambitious, and it does allow itself to explore just so much of this domain, and I think does so successfully. Obviously, if you're unsatisfied by this, playing through again gives you more to think about, because you see the events now anew. Wandering the island now a second time, it's like the game recognizes that this is your second time on the island, and by passing through it again, you go through a slightly different journey. I think that what's so interesting is this game spoke to a lot of people and inspired many games to follow, not just the spiritual successor that the Chinese Room came up with, but also one of the some of the best in class would be Gone Home, which takes, instead of an island, now you're just wandering an empty house, a very large empty house, and also Edith Finch, What Remains of Edith Finch, which I think is a best in class when it comes to walking simulators. The density of those games is much tighter, and so it feels a little bit less aimless and roamy. This game feels kind of empty now. What are we? We're over a decade from its first release, and in the meantime, I think we've discovered that these kinds of games benefit from a greater density of like material to look at and think about. as you go along, or at least to experience like a greater density of the environment. And so I think that future games have like iterated successfully on top of this, but I think a limit to what can be done when you take away so much interactivity. You'll know, we were not interacting with any object. We didn't touch anything. It was just cardinal movements and looking, up, down, and around, and it was a zoom feature, and that was it. And I think that lack of interactivity also kind of pulls back on what's really possible in this kind of medium, and future games that have taken this model and iterated on it have done a better job of integrating the interactivity. And again, Edith Finch is a great example of that. Yeah. But you might say on the converse, right? Dear Esther is the lack of interactivity is in some ways the lesson of the game, right? At the time this would have come out, the lack of interactivity is not expected. It's very limiting. People expected a run button, for example, and the fact that you can really only float around like a ghost and you don't have hands is part of the idea of the game. You are bereft of your usual means of communication, and thus all you're left with is a kind of observational reflection on your own life through the metaphor of this island. That's not something that most people choose to play in their free time. So in some ways, Dear Esther, I think, was so popular, like did so well, in part because it was so ambitious and new, and no one knew what they were getting themselves into. And now I find myself uninclined to try experiences like Dear Esther again, because it's like, all right, I've done that. It's bleak, it's hard. I wouldn't recommend it. I think the way that everybody's gone to the Rapture, which is our next game to explore on this channel, the way that it approaches it is really great, because it gives us more to do, and it gives us a greater palette of human experience to explore. So anyway, I've gone now for an hour and a half, and I think I'll wrap it here. But thanks for listening and for playing along in this game with me. And I'm happy to share this little indie gem from a decade ago, and I think it's aged really well. I mean, they've done a lot of work remastering it, but the experience is still very much intact. It's still very spooky and haunted. And yeah, there even looked to be ghosts kind of sitting in the frame here. I was checking that. Anywho, so yeah, awesome. We'll connect in the new year, and look forward to sharing the next game with you on the next Videogame Sommelier.